Hey, could you stop screaming? I'm about to shoot. What? I'm hearing it in my head. Okay, that makes more sense. One, two, three, four. Da 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 dee ba ba da. Dee doo da doo doo da doo. Doo doo da doo da ba ba. It's Wednesday. Ha ha hi. Hi, everyone. Despite a heavy police presence, I went to the comic shop today. You want to see what I got? Sure. Picks of the weekend. Da, 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 da. It was just a little parade of police cars I saw on the way home. Ugh. But what a better time for superhero escapism. You know, a place where sometimes the good guys win one. Well, that's enough editorializing. So I went down to the old shop today, and I got me a few books. One of which in particular I'm very stoked about. I'll start with the trade paperback I bought today. Is Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's by a small publisher known as Detective Comics, and it seemed interesting, so I thought I'd pick it up. This is, of course, if you're unfamiliar, the major reboot of the DC Universe that they did in the mid-'80s by Marv Wolfman and George Perez, largely considered their finest work. As well established by now, I'm not much of a DC guy, but I wanted to, now that comics are coming out again, it's still kind of in drips and drabs, like I only got 3 books this week. And it's not like I'm looking to spend more money, but I do want to support the shop as much as I can. So I'm trying to keep my average weekly buy at about the same level as it was before the end times. So that was something I had asked him about when I was still getting stuff delivered to me. And he didn't have it then, but then he told me a couple weeks ago that he had reordered some and they'd come in. So you can also get that from the library, though. You should be doing that if you can't throw money around like old money bags here. I also got this week, I got Swamp Thing 100-page giant number 4. I'm not sure what the numbering on these books are, but that's largely because they're DC books. I still really love Swamp Thing, always have done. I'm not sure who wrote or drew any of this, which is how I kind of like it. I'll talk about that in a minute, but yeah, the other 100-page giant that I bought. And I think I mentioned last week, I've been kind of in the mood for those because I've been reading that DC Implosion or the comic book Implosion book. And they talk about the 100-page giant a lot, which I have always thought was a very good deal. Like, I always kind of wished Marvel would do more of those. Marvel always had annuals when I was a kid, especially during the summer. But I think they were 64 pages for the most part, which is fine. But 100 pages, that's a lot. That's more. I don't know if you knew that. So, yeah. Looking forward to that. Swamp Thing remains one of my favorites, and again, we'll talk about a Swamp Thing book I read this last week. Also this week, I got Birds of Prey, number 1. Yes, another DC book. I made note of this, though, because Brian Azzarello wrote it, and it is also on the black label, which means there will be swear words. Maybe even some boobs, who knows? Again, pure escapism for me at this point. So this is also oversized and overpriced, frankly. But like I say, there's only one book that came out this week that I would normally get. So I got a couple others. And like I said, Brian Azzarello wrote it, and he's responsible for such tremendous comic books as 100 Bullets and Loveless, although the art's kind of on that sometimes. And he's a great... I buy anything Azzarello writes for the most part, because he does do a lot of DC stuff. And I'm just like, I don't really care about the Birds of Prey, but, you know, the movie was fun. I don't know. But here's what came out this week that I've been looking... Oh, it's The Boys, Dear Becky, number 1. There's Becky. So, huge fan of The Boys. That has definitely been established by now. But, and I definitely noticed this on my last read through about a year ago. Becky Butcher is Billy Butcher's dead wife, and she is the woman in the refrigerator, basically. I don't know if you're not familiar with that little piece of terminology. Back in the 90s, when after Hal Jordan lost his mind and blew up Coast City, and the Green Lanterns were very disappointed, so they took his ring away from him and they gave it to Kyle Rayner, who became Green Lantern, like the standard Green Lantern, for a few years after that. And he's still a Green Lantern, I believe. He's still in continuity? I don't know. But what happened in that first arc is that Kyle finds that ring, and he's just some dude in LA, of all places. And the ring comes to him, and he's like, I don't want this. I want to wear Nine Inch Nails t-shirts and be in my 20s in the 90s. And he comes home to find his girlfriend chopped up, or at least, at the very least, killed and stuffed into a refrigerator. I don't remember why. It was something local gangsters or something. I don't know. But it was the moment that Kyle's like, I have to become Green Lantern. And so Gail Simone, the great writer, the great comic book writer Gail Simone, coined that term, the woman in the refrigerator, when you have a very two-dimensional female character whose only purpose is to be killed and therefore give the protagonist his call to action. And she rightfully points out that's not exactly... it's kind of a sexist it's a sexist thing to do. And I don't think that Garth Ennis or any of these guys were doing it on purpose. Like, we hate women, so we're going to write them out. I just think, and this is just coming from me and my experiences with writing, I'm terrible at writing female characters because I'm terrible at talking to women generally, I guess. I'm just terrible at women. So I've often avoided writing female characters into things, which is stupid. I mean, at the very least, it's not a very creative way to go about that problem. So, my theory is that Ennis himself also sees this as being the case, and that Becky Butcher, as we got to know her in the series, is largely just a woman in a refrigerator. She only appears in 2 or 3 issues, and they are the issues, the miniseries Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker, which is just about Billy Butcher. And it's really a very beautiful love story, I will say that, Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker, because it shows Billy going through being in the army and fighting in the Falklands, I believe, and then finding Becky, and she does help him become less angry, which is definitely something I can relate to. You're not supposed to do that to your girlfriends. I have found that out the hard way. So I think Ennis saw that in hindsight and was like, oh, maybe we should give Becky another story. That's the theory. I haven't read any interviews with him or anything like that, and it's not like he doesn't ever do them or anything. I just haven't. Oh, because I think the show was popular. The show was popular enough to get a second season, so Dynamite was probably also like, hey, do you want to do more of these comic books? And he said, well, does Jimmy want us to? And they were like, you can assume so. And then they did. Those are picks of the week. Da-da-ba-da-da-da! And that picks the last picks. All right. I got very winded right there. Did you notice that? I'm extreme. I actually had to go into my part-time job today. And then I went and had lunch with some of the boys. And then I went to the shop. What have you been up to all day? No, I'm exhausted is what I'm saying. And also, I'm just exhausted, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, so last week I got to read a bunch of funny books this past weekend. And let's talk about them, shall we? First up, this was not really a funny book, but it's called Jerks of the 80s. And it's, oh gosh, I was going to look up the Etsy and then I didn't. Okay. Alex Delaney, Delaney. It's available on his Etsy for sure, or just Google Jerks of the 80s. And this should come up. This was a very fun book, though. Look at that, Jason Hervey. There's a lot of great drawings, and these are all the bullies and dickheads from all the TV and movies that I grew up with. So I found it very much a trip down memory lane. But yeah, really fun book. Highly recommend it. What else did I read last week? Oh, Kidoki. Yeah, we'll start with these. So I read Bitterroot 6 and 7, and now this book has been up to monthly. I'm going to be buying this book monthly as opposed to trade waiting, which is kind of what I've been doing because it's that good. I don't go back a couple weeks and you hear me rave about Bitterroot, but yeah, it's super fun, steamy, punky stuff. And it's very African American centric. So if you enjoy that sort of thing, as a white person, I definitely do. And yeah, it's good. I got nothing. What else I read? I'm kind of going out of order. I also read Marauders Number 10. This was a lot of fun. I really lost track of all the X books and the storylines therein, but Marauders continues to be one of my favorite. the book itself centers around Kitty Pryde, who, for some reason, even though she has phasing abilities, she's unable to walk through any of the gates into Krakoa. Krakoa is the independent nation state established by mutants in the continuity now, in regular Marvel continuity. And they have these portal gates set up all over the world so mutants can just show up in Krakoa. But for some reason, some mutants can't, and Kitty Pryde is one of them. So what Kitty Pryde has been doing is out on her ship. She is on the high seas helping other mutants like herself who can't use these gates to get to Krakoa. And so it's been super fun. Kitty Pryde's always been one of my favorites. You know, obviously I had a big crush on her when I was a little kid because she was in the X-Men and she was close to my age. And she was a nice Jewish girl. I already had a type back then. I barely dated any Jewish women. I'm just being a pig. Also, Forge is in this. There's like a lot of really good, like Emma Frost is on the Marauders, and so that's great. And also, just the fact that it's called the Marauders, if you're not as familiar with X-Men lore as you should be. The Marauders were a group of bad guys that Mr. Sinister sent into the tunnels beneath New York City, and they slaughtered the Morlocks in what was one of the first, if not the first, major mutant book crossover that Marvel did, called The Mutant Massacre. So for Kitty to take that name and apply it to her team, it's like that thing where people will reclaim a word, and I love that sort of stuff. You can tell because I did the devil sign. Okay, I'm really babbling too much. This was super fun. 100-page giant, Our Fighting Forces, starring the Unknown Soldier. I was super stoked, as you may or not recall, that there was an Unknown Soldier story. I don't know if, when I recorded the video last week, if I knew that Christopher Priest wrote that story. Come on, dude, Christopher Priest. And it was drawn by Chris Mooneyham, who's been, if not my absolute favorite, then definitely in my top like 3 or 4 comic book artists of like the last 10 years. Incredible stuff. And all the stories in this book were super fun. It was just, 100-page giant is a fun book, and it's $5. You can't really go wrong. I can't recommend that sort of thing enough, especially if you don't want to jump into something in the middle of continuity, because none of that really applies here. You know, it's not all superhero-y stuff. But this super was Avengers number 33. And as I pointed out last week, this arc is called The Age of Khonshu, which means that it's going to be very Moon Knight-centric, which I'm stoked for. And sure enough, Moon Knight, how can I put this delicately, totally houses the Avengers. Like, Moon Knight takes Doctor Strange down and a bunch of other, you know, big top-tier Thor. Moon Knight versus Thor, and Moon Knight wins. Oh, I didn't mean to spoil that. But, come on, dude. That's super fun. And I've also, as I did mention, I like Moon Knight a lot because he's cuckoo pants. He's got 4 different distinct personalities. He's a Looney Tune. It's great. I'm not saying that if you have mental health problems, don't. I'm not talking about you. Yeesh. Sorry. I got to read a bunch of trades this week too. I got to read Justice League Dark Volume 1. This was super duper fun. I'm not a super DC guy, and when I do like DC though, a lot of the Magic characters, they were always better. I love Doctor Strange, but DC was always better at doing magical books. Or I don't know how else to describe them, but like House of Secrets and House of Mystery, which were more horror, I guess. Yeah, DC could do off superhero stuff in the 70s especially way better than Marvel. Like, DC's westerns in the 70s are above reproach. DC's war books in the 60s and 70s are killer. Although I don't think Marvel's are any worse. And DC's horror books in the 70s were super good. And again, I love Marvel's horror stuff, but I think DC's might be just a hair better. So Justice League Dark consists of Zatanna, Man-Bat of all people, Swamp Thing, Wonder Woman, and Detective Chimp. And this was a team that got set up during the No Justice storyline from 2 years ago, which was like a big crossover. It was right before Rebirth, or right? No, I don't remember, but it's good. And I had read the first couple issues, and James Tynion IV writes it, and he's a great writer. And it's just a lot of fun, man. Constantine shows up. There's a lot of, he refers back to the Alan Moore run on Swamp Thing a lot, which is really cool, because that's, to me, the definitive. So, yeah, recommended very much. I also got Kick-Ass, The New Girl, Volume 2. Again, super duper fun stuff. It's Niles and Frusin, who are Marcelo Frusin is a great. Most Italian comic book artists these days are just killing it. I think Italy has become the Philippines of this time. Like the Philippines in the 70s and 80s, that's where all those guys came. Like so many big, you know, now I can't think of his name. Tony Isabella and I can't think of a single. Name some more Filipino comic. No, no, no. He's from Ohio. I don't know why I talked to you about it. Anyway, Kick Ass. Yeah, super good. So in this one, like I mentioned last week, Dave Lazuski is no longer Kick Ass. This woman who was I can't remember her name. She was a veteran in Afghanistan, and now she's using her military training to take down the drug ring or the drug trafficking in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so in this arc, she is now established as a major player, and she's only taking her salary. She's not like, living high on the hog. So she still has her own. Because she's still balancing being a single mother and working a regular job and going to college. So it's all that stuff. It's super fun. I don't have much more to say. Deathstroke Arkham. Whoo! Hot diggity damn. Speaking of Christopher Priest, this guy, I'll tell you this. This is volume what? Hell, why don't they number these? I don't know, but since Christopher Priest started writing Deathstroke 3 years ago, it has not lost a step. It is one of the best superhero books on the stands. I would put it up against a lot of the indie stuff, too. Christopher Priest, dude, I think I raved about him last week. The guy can do no wrong. There's not a trick in superhero comics that he hasn't done and or invented. Like, I don't know how else to really put it. But this is not your typical superhero book. It's not wall to wall. There's plenty of action, but it's not wall to wall, which is a lot like his Black Panther run. There's action and but there's also character development and there's relationships and people have to balance things and it's amazing. And there's I know this isn't necessarily an appeal, but he doesn't spoon feed you anything, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not very continuity centric. Deathstroke kind of exists on the fringe of the DC universe a lot, but in this arc, the previous arc, him and Batman teamed up and then fought and then teamed up, or both. And then in this arc, he's been tossed into Arkham Asylum. Hot damn. I mean, I've kind of gotten bored with Batman over the years and with his rogues gallery with the whole Arkham thing, but man, this brought it right. I was like, oh yeah, this stuff is super fun. So I can't you should go back and get the whole run, and you can probably get those at the library. Finally, Getting Falls Volume 2. And now this one, again, super fun. Sorrentino is just killing it all over the place, but I don't have anything. That one you definitely have to read the first trade to know, because I had read those issues, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I remember that. It's not that it's me. I'm not paying close enough attention. But it's really good, and it really ends on like, oh, that was a twist I didn't see coming, so that was great. And then finally, The Fearsome Dr. Fang. I can't believe this is another 20 minutes. Why are you letting me talk so much? The Fearsome Dr. Fang from the great TKO Press. Now, as I mentioned, was not at all familiar with Z-Chun or Mike Weiss. That's because this is their first comic book. Dan McDade, I do know the name, but when they're in the little... Oh, right, he drew a Planet of the Apes book, which is probably how I know it. But all the other books listed here, I'm like, oh, I know that book, but I haven't read it. But I do know the name. Super fun stuff, like I counted on. Very pulpy, very, it takes place in the early 20th century, so about more than 100 years ago. And, yeah, like I mentioned when I bought it, which was however many weeks ago, the Fearsome Dr. Fang is presenting himself as this over-the-top Fu Manchu type villain, but he's actually doing good with it, not unlike Kick-Ass the New Girl. So, yeah, it was super fun. To be honest with you, it's probably the least good TKO book I've read so far, but it's still super good. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't want to damn this book with faint praise, but if this is TKO's, bottom line, minimum threshold, then you're in good hands buying anything that they put out. As am I. All right, that was Pixelastic. All right. That's it. I'm going to go now because I got to load this up, and also it's super hot in here. If you guys could do me a personal favor and not be killed by any diseases or cops, that would be super great. I would really consider that a personal favor. I am not making light of anything. I want that clear. Be safe out there, please, and read more comics, I guess. I don't know. You have something better to